All right. So, just a quick reminder while we are reading, you're collecting any evidence of new character traits in addition to those we've already named for Pinmai. And hi, Emily. And we're also kind of working our way up Story Mountain. But I suspect, based on what I know about stories, that the problem is probably going to get worse before it gets solved. So, let's see where they are today. We are on chapter 15. I wonder what that picture means. All right. Oh, I feel like I shouldn't let you leave, Suya said, shaking her head. The cold morning light cascaded through the window. Pinmai and Yishan were packed to go. They had planned to leave before breakfast so as not to add to Suya's food worries, but she pushed 2 bowls of hot porridge into their hands. Children walking alone to the city of bright moonlight in winter? You're meeting someone there? Yishan nodded. Well, I'm sure we will meet someone, he hissed at Pinmai when he caught her guilty expression. Pinmai could easily imagine Suya's horror if she knew the truth. Sifan, old Sai, Suya said, shaking her head again. Tell them to stay. Oh, I wish I could go with you, Sifan said from his bed, the longing obvious in his voice. Old Sai brought them 2 rolls, a leather ground cover and 2 fur blankets, he said with satisfaction. His eyes twinkled at them. From the hidden hole under my bed. Oh, thank you. We'll bring them back, Pinmai said, realizing their value. Just bring back a good tale, storyteller's granddaughter, Old Sai said kindly. Yes, Sifan called. I'll be expecting a good one. And with that, Pinmai and Yishan left. The door of the stone house closed, and the silence of winter mocked them. Suddenly, Pinmai yearned for the sound of Ama's voice, and inside, she felt as if the ever-present hollow ache would swallow her. She blinked her eyes at the glittering ice-covered stones and took a deep breath. It was time to leave the mountain. Yishan led Pinmai to the main road as she nestled into her multicolored coat, its warmth like Ama's arms. The snow began to fall, gently at first, but then heavier and heavier, flakes dropping and fluttering all around. Anybody here ever seen the snow before? They're like white butterflies, Pinmai thought. Hundreds and hundreds of white butterflies. And one red one? A wavering, brilliant red color flittered in front of her. A red butterfly! Impossible! Pinmai shook her head, and when she looked again, there was only the white falling snow. She must be seeing things. After a good distance, the grumbling in Yishan's stomach became so loud, he had to admit he was hungry. As they unrolled the leather ground cover to sit at the side of the road, they found a package with a generous supply of rice balls, most likely smuggled in by Sifan or Old Sai. And with cries of delight, they fell upon them as if they were candied berries. Oh, I hope they don't get in trouble with Suya for giving us these, said Pinmai with appreciation. Yishan grunted in agreement, his mouth too full to reply. And for a moment, all was quiet except for their satisfied munching. But only for a moment. For just as Pinmai swallowed her second rice ball, there was a faint rumble in the distance. She recognized that sound. Horses. Pinmai looked at Yishan in alarm. He had cocked his head, listening intently. Just one horse, he said, but it's coming fast. He probably won't even notice us. Pinmai listened again. She could hear the galloping hooves on the stone now. They waited, not even attempting to swallow their food. Faster and closer, faster and closer, faster and closer, and at last, like a cresting wave, the rider burst out of the silver mist. As the rider passed, Pinmai gaped at him. He was riding a milk-white horse, so white that the animal blended in completely to the snow. The rider, a flash of gleaming blue silk, looked like he was flying. They passed only for a moment, but the horse's thundering hooves belied its grace, for it seemed to glide more than run. As the horse and rider began to fade into the distance, Pinmai kept staring, unable to look away. So she saw it clearly when the horse screamed with a panicked shriek and reared up on its back legs. And she also saw the blue smear of the thrown rider collapsed to the ground. Chapter 16. I wonder who that is. Both Pinmai and Yishan ran over to the rider. The horse had melted into the white landscape, but the mound of luxurious gray and blue silk on the ground reassured them that this had not been a dream. Yishan gently turned the rider over, and they both gasped. The rider was a woman, and she was a stunningly beautiful woman. Only moments before, Pinmai had decided the horse was the pinnacle of beauty, but now she found herself reconsidering. The opulent fur-trimmed silk and gold ornaments told of the woman's wealth and nobility, but those were mere faded trappings compared with her loveliness. Her face was so pure and clear, it could have been formed of water or jade, and her shining hair, loosened from its ornate pins, pooled around her like smooth black water on the white snow. Even Yishan looked amazed. The woman opened her eyes. "Children?" she murmured. "Why are there children here? What happened?" "Oh, well, your horse threw you," Yishan said, "and we just want to make sure you're all right." The woman sat up. She looked at them, and she looked at the countryside around her. Pinmai noticed that her eyes looked as if happiness had not shone in them in a long time. "Oh, I remember now," the woman said, her voice like a bamboo water chime. Baima reared suddenly, and it's not like him at all. Something unexpected must have surprised him. Pinmai remembered the red butterflies she thought she had seen in the snow. Could that have surprised the horse? Do I still have... And the woman pushed aside her folds of silk and held a small bag up to her chest. She breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, here it is. I hope it was not hurt. The woman opened the bag and pulled out a lavishly embroidered fabric. As she held it open, Pinmai found herself gawking. It was an embroidered picture. There was a grand mansion surrounded by a beautiful garden with flowered fish ponds and red-pillared pavilions. A sparkling river flowed before a stone wall, and mountains disappeared into a sea of clouds. The finest details were included, from the butterfly-shaped windows to the swimming ducks. Pinmai knew Amma was known for her embroidery skills, but this was extraordinary. Every thread vibrated with color. How beautiful, Pinmai breathed. her awe overcoming her shyness. It's just like the widow's embroidery in Ama's story. Story? The woman inquired. Oh, everything reminds her of a story, Ishan said mockingly, but also with a touch of pride. Pinmai is a storyteller. I am? Pinmai thought with surprise. She had thought of herself as many things before: a scared mouse, a quiet girl, a coward, but she'd never thought of herself as a storyteller. But before she could think further, the woman gave her a smile. Well, I'm not sure if I'm ready to get up yet, the woman said. So perhaps a story would be good medicine. Pinmai began to shake her head in protest, but the woman's eyes were weighted with so much worry that Pinmai found her own heart pale. The green of the jade bracelet shimmered at her like a thread in one of Ama's embroidery silks. Again, Pinmai felt the familiar longing pierce her. Ama, Ama would never refuse to tell a story. So how could she? So, with her voice slightly trembling, Pinmai began. The story of the widow's embroidery. There once was a widow who was extremely skilled at embroidery. When she embroidered a flower, bees would try to nestle in it. When she embroidered a tree, birds would try to land on it. She was known far and wide and supported herself and her young son with the embroidered pieces she sold. One day, when she was at the market, she saw an old man selling a painting of a palatial estate. There was an elegant villa with lakes dotted with orange fish and moon gates that led to courtyards lined with trees. She stared at the painting, and a yearning she had never felt before filled her. Without thinking, she spent all the money meant for rice, and instead, she bought the painting. When she returned home, she showed the painting to her son. If only we could live in this painting, she said to him with tears in her eyes. I feel as if my heart will break if I don't live in this place. Well, mother, the son said, trying to comfort her, your embroidery is so lifelike, perhaps you should embroider this picture, and then you'll feel just like you're living in it. The widow's face lit up and she nodded. Yes, of course, she said, and immediately went to work. And she did not stop working. Hour after hour, her needle moved, and at night, she lit a lantern to continue. She carried on like this for days, and the days turned into months. Her son, without complaint, began to cut wood to support them. Then the months turned into years. The widow's hair turned white, and when strands of hair fell from her head, she embroidered them into clouds. Her needle pricked her fingers, and when her blood dripped, she stitched it into the red peonies. They could no longer afford lantern oil, so she burned branches, and when her eyes watered from the smoke, she sewed her tears into the lotus ponds. Finally, after 8 years, the old widow put down her needle. She was finished. Her son, who was now a young man, stood in awe as he looked at the completed piece. It was magnificent. The widow sighed, a soft sound of contentment. The door banged open and a wild wind burst into the room. The embroidery flew into the air and out the door. The widow and her son rushed after it, but only saw it fluttering in the distance. The widow collapsed to the ground. When the widow finally opened her eyes, she begged her son to find her embroidery. I shall die without it, she said. So the son left his mother in care of his neighbors, and he went in search of the embroidery. After many days of traveling, he found himself by the sea. The moon was rising, and its reflection on the water made a long silver-white path that connected seamlessly with the ground. As the young man followed the moon path with his eyes, he was startled to see a small figure lying on the shore. It was a boy. "Hello," the boy said as he fixed his red cap. "What are you doing here?" The widow's son then saw that this was not an ordinary boy. He must be an immortal of some sort, the son thought. Remember, an immortal is somebody who never dies. So he told the boy his story. "Oh, that embroidery," the boy said. "The Sea King's daughter sent a servant for it. She and all her ladies in waiting are copying it for their own pieces." But I must get it back, the son said. "My mother, she'll die without it." "Oh, see, you'd have to go to the Sea King's palace, and that's a hard journey," the boy said. "First, you must swim the sea until you reach frozen water and dive into it without a shiver or a moan. If you make one sound of discontent, you will turn into ice and shatter into 10,000 pieces. So do you still want to go?" The son nodded and started immediately to walk to the ocean. The boy grabbed his arm. "Wait," the boy said. "I'll get you a ride." The boy put 2 fingers in his mouth and made a shrill whistle. The waves of the sea roared, and as the water rolled off the shore, a huge white stone appeared. The boy went over to the stone and knocked on it. "Come out," he said. "This fellow needs a ride." Did the stone quiver? The widow's son rubbed his eyes. "Hurry up," the boy said. "She'll never even notice you're gone. She's busy sewing. Come on." The waves smashed into the stone and made a crackling noise like a porcelain plate breaking. When the water withdrew, a white horse stood among some broken pieces of matching white stone. "Good," the boy said. "He's in a hurry." The boy made a motion with his hand, and the horse walked up to the son. "Now, you'll make it for sure," the boy said with a grin. The widow's son, after closing his gaping mouth, nodded his thanks, climbed on the horse's back, and galloped into the water. The horse and the young man swam through the piercing cold water. The dark waves flung shards of ice at him, and the blood from his cuts steamed and then froze. When the water no longer churned and all was silent, the horse plunged into the bitter water, and all was black. When the son opened his eyes, he was warm and dry and still on the horse. The sun was overhead, and a majestic palace of crystal was before him. Without his urging, the horse entered. The horse walked into the palace and brought him into a grand hall, where his mother's embroidery hung in a place of honor. Dozens of women were sitting around it, each sewing their own copy. "Hello, I'm here for my mother's embroidery," he announced. The women all turned and looked at him and whispered to one another, until one, dressed in blue and the loveliest of them all, rose. It was only then that he saw she had a fishtail instead of legs. "Oh, please, let us keep it for the rest of today, so we can finish our own copies," she said. "You may take it tomorrow." The widow's son was awestruck by her beauty. Even with her fishtail, she was the most stunning creature he had ever encountered, and he, who had not been turned by pain or possible death, found he could not refuse her. So he let himself be led to a golden bed at the back of the hall, where he soon fell asleep. In the meantime, the women all rushed to finish their pieces. They called their servants to bring more threads and silks, and the woman in blue requested a new needle. "Fetch the finest one we have from my father's treasury," she ordered her servant. But one by one, each woman rose to compare her work with the original, shook her head in defeat, and abandoned the hall. The last one to leave was the woman with the fishtail. She, of course, was the Sea King's daughter, the most beautiful as well as the most skilled. But as she held her embroidery up to the widow's, she too shook her head. Hers, like the others, was a poor copy. No one could match the fineness or colors of the widow's silver clouds, flaming flowers, or crystal lakes. The widow's embroidery is so beautiful, the Sea King's daughter thought. I love it. I wish I could be a part of it. And with that whim, she began to embroider a small amount of herself into the garden of the widow's embroidery. But I'll give myself legs, she thought with an amused smile, because it's a picture of a mortal land. So when she finished, it was late and she was quite tired. She tucked her needle into the widow's embroidery to retrieve in the morning and left for bed. When the sun woke up, it was still dark and the hall was empty. His mother's embroidery still hung at the front of the room, glistening in the fading moonlight. What if the sea daughter changes her mind? He thought. I'd better go now. So he took the embroidery as quietly as possible and jumped onto the waiting horse. The amazing horse took off at a gallop, racing up through the water, across the frozen sea, and back to the seaside. When they reached the shore, the man dismounted. The horse waded into the water, and an ocean wave washed over it. When the water withdrew, the horse was once again a large white stone. Then another large crest rose and scooped the stone back to sea. The young man gazed at the empty impression on the shore and at the rolled embroidery in his hand. Without another pause, he turned and ran home. Mother! He called as he burst into the house. The widow was in bed, thin and pale, with her eyes closed. He feared the worst. He rushed to her side and laid the embroidery on her. Your embroidery's here, Mother. I've returned. Slowly, the widow's fingers touched the smooth, delicate threads. Her eyes opened, and she smiled. Her second smile in 8 years. My son, she said, with one hand on the embroidery and the other clasping his. Help me bring this out in the light so I can see it better. So outside, they carefully spread the embroidery on the ground. As they unfolded it, the silk grew and grew. It covered their poor house and bare land, and in its place, the stately manor and a glorious garden formed. The widow's embroidery was coming to life. Swimming fish in the sparkling water, the trees with the jade green leaves, the courtyard with patterned walkways, it was all real. Everything was exactly as the widow had sewed, except for one thing. For standing among the brilliant flowers and fluttering butterflies was a beautiful woman dressed in blue. She held a silver needle in her fingers and was looking around in confusion, for it was the Sea King's daughter who had sewn herself into the embroidery. But when she saw the widow and her son, her expression cleared and was replaced with one of affection. She saw she could not love the embroidery so much without loving the person who made it. The delighted widow welcomed her to share in her incredible fortune. The son and the Sea King's daughter soon married, and the widow lived the rest of her days in complete contentment. And that is the story, what was it called? That is the story of the widow's embroidery. Is that the end? The noblewoman asked in an almost demanding tone. What else happened to the son and the Sea King's daughter? I suppose, Pinmai said, a little surprised. After they were married, they lived happily as well? Yes, but The woman stopped mid-sentence, and both Pin Mai and Yishan looked towards where she was staring. A glimmer of scarlet was wavering in the white and gray sky. The red butterfly! Pin Mai hadn't imagined it. The two children and the woman watched without moving. The butterfly flittered through the falling snowflakes, back and forth, and back and forth. It was an intricate, silent dance. And at last, the butterfly landed on the noblewoman's lap, on top of the gorgeous embroidery. It gave one final tremble and vanished. Pinmai blinked her eyes. Had the butterfly melted into the embroidery? Or had a gust of wind blown it away? Where did it go? But then the woman gave a low cry of anguish, so full of sorrow and heartache, all the other thoughts disappeared. He is dead, the woman whispered. He's dead. And a single tear began to roll down her cheek. And that is where we stop for today.